Hey everyone, and welcome back to a live new episode of Climate Curious, presented by the Solutions Project. I'm Shanae Watkins, your host, joined by my ASL interpreter, Rory Burton, and we're here to talk all the latest issues, environmental racism, climate change, and COVID-19 with movement leaders from across the country. Every Tuesday, we have fun, we get a little serious, and we engage in real talk with some of the people who are creating real lasting change and saving our planet. Our goal is to transform the way that you think about climate change and the way that you can take part in its solutions. Today, we're talking our food and our bodies. Have you ever wondered where your food comes from when you're picking it up at the grocery store? Or maybe you have a relationship with the local farmer where you get your produce from. Well, don't worry if you answered no to any of those questions, because for most people, the answer is no. Our guests today are a permaculture farmer and a farm workers' rights activist. Between the two of them, they envision a world with a more just food system that takes care of both our workers and our food supply. I can't wait to get into some real talk with them later on in the episode. But first, as always, send in your questions using hashtag ClimateCurious for the Q&A segment later on. And of course, keep following and keep sharing with your friends because this has been a great summer so far. Now, let's bring in our guest. Okay, so our first guest is the executive director of the United Farm Workers Foundation, the nonprofit founded by the late and great labor and civil rights leader, Cesar Chavez. She's a champion of immigrant rights who mobilizes farm workers and the organizations across the country to advocate for immigration reform, pesticide protections, heat standards, and other worker protections. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Diana Tellefson Torres. Hey, Diana.
Hi, everyone.
How you doing?
I'm doing well, Sean. It's wonderful to be here with you, Chris.
Same. So happy to have you with us today. Okay, so our next guest describes himself as a permaculture farmer and an indigenous food sovereignty advocate who is, and I quote, tall, skinny, and light-skinned with green eyes. A former software engineer, he's out to democratize food and agriculture. He's the owner of Sylvanaqua Farms, where he sells his pastured eggs, poultry, and meats at farmers markets, retail establishments, and restaurants all across the DC area. Everyone, please welcome Chris Newman.
Thank you.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I can't complain.
Good. It's good to see you. And thank you both for joining us today. We have a lot to cover, so we're just going to jump right into the news of the week. You ready?
Ready.
Okay, so this week we're looking at an article written by Hannah Hong in Real Simple. Since the start of the pandemic, we've seen reports and images of farmers throwing away fresh produce while food banks are seeing huge spikes in demand. Seeing a problem, this article talks about two Brown University students who started a program called Food Link that helps to reduce food waste by purchasing excess food from farmers and donating it to food banks across the US. The two started the program in April, paying $5,000 to farm workers and truck drivers handling the food, and has since grown to a team of over 100 people, redirecting more than 2.4 million pounds of food. That's a lot of food. Okay, and so now to you, Chris. My first question is, we all saw those photos of those disposed food. What do you make of this Food Link program? And better yet, is your farm a part of this program?
My farm is not. But what you see with what Food Link is doing is basically college kids doing what farm owners should do, which is create that direct link between who needs food and who produces food. Throughout the rest of our talk, you'll hear me make a lot of distinctions between farm owners and farm workers. I have a lot of respect for the latter, and I have big problems with the former. And a lot of what you're seeing with, there's these images of dump trucks just dumping potatoes into a crater and milk just being, poured off the side of a cliff into, into Never Land or wherever it goes. This is what happens when you have farm owners who aren't incentivized to run their farms as businesses, where they're not directly connected to a market. They're connected to this kind of black box of subsidies and commodities that go into, some of it goes to the market, some of it goes to stuff that nobody really wants, like ethanol, some of it goes overseas, and who knows if they want it there. But what you see with what these college kids are doing is them plugging a gap that's being left by the fact that farming is a relatively opaque industry that doesn't really connect directly with its consumers and the people who need what they produce.
I see. It's super helpful. I love that. And it seems like, in the article, they have like a great diagram that, has the way that they are connecting exactly what you're saying, these farmers to the ones who are in need. And the article also points out in there that 1 in 2 children and 1 in 3 adults will experience food insecurity during this pandemic. Diana, I know that you do a lot of work, with farm workers and communities. What can you tell us about the growing food insecurity that you've seen personally since the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's certainly an irony that farm workers, the very people who are picking the fruits and vegetables, who are milking the cows from the milk that Chris talked about that potentially is being dumped, farm workers are the folks who are nourishing us. And yet what we are seeing is that they are experiencing food insecurity, not just now in the immediate, but also pre-COVID-19. And so the irony in this country that farm workers, the very people who nourish us, can't often put food on their own tables is just awful. And so I think that's one of the things that we're trying to address, because COVID-19 has only exacerbated that vulnerability that exists with farm workers. And so, I think in talking about food insecurity, we have to address the fact that many of the individuals who are food insecure are also working poor, who are currently essential workers like farm workers or other food workers, et cetera. And so how do we address that, not just now, but in the future, to ensure that everyone's able to feed their own family? Just, we have been setting up for the last 3 months different food distributions, both with food bank food and also just with donations, et cetera. And so we've been able to also partner with the World Central Kitchen, where we've provided, as of last week, 170,000 meals throughout rural California. We've helped distribute 14,000 emergency food boxes. And that work is being done in farm worker communities in rural California, where that food is really needed. And so I think, the irony of it all also is that in these very big ag areas, we're also seeing that some of the food pantries or food banks that are providing us with food to help distribute in farm worker communities have been running out of food. And so if we're talking about food waste, and yet our experience is also that there is a lot of food need, how do we address that in such a way that different needs are being addressed in addition to those of agribusiness?
That makes total sense. And shout out to the work that you're doing as well to help share those meals. That is, like you said, is very needed. Chris, as a farmer, what have you during the pandemic, what have you been seeing in terms of, food waste or, food insecurity, and how are you, what efforts are you doing at your farm?
So it's been really interesting being a farmer who's directly hooked up to the market, who's maybe a little more integrated than a lot of others are. We haven't had a food waste problem on our farm. Our restaurants disappeared overnight, and immediately our demand was filled by just door-to-door customers and households that needed that food. But we do, and I talk about this a lot in the things that I write, the food that we produce is overwhelmingly out of reach of most people who are food insecure. It just is. And small farming does a lot of mental gymnastics and BS to try to justify it. But the bottom line is that sustainable agriculture is basically for rich white people as it's right now. And that's one of the biggest things we need to change. And that's why our organization is moving from being this small, homestead on steroids to actually pursuing scale to some extent, but avoiding that really problematic relationship between farm owners and farm workers. That's a fundamentally exploitative relationship in I'd say an overwhelming number of the cases. Maybe Diana would second that. To having something that's employee owned, it's worker owned, so that as the farm gets larger, as the farm vertically integrates, you don't have the exploitation problems, while we're able to take advantage of economies of scale that make our food more accessible to more people, that actually start to attack things like food sovereignty and making sure that Black and brown people, who are the most food insecure, at least in our area, are able to participate in this system that we're putting together.
Right, and I want to talk about that. You bring up a great point about the access to food and what foods are available, what are not. What kind of the food do you see that is out of reach to Black and brown communities?
Well, I mean, not to put too simple of an answer on it, but all of it. It's like a lot of people who haven't been poor or who haven't been poor adjacent don't understand the relationship between poverty and access to food. It's not just about being able to afford it. It's also about having that it takes to cook, prepare food, to store food, to participate in the food system as somebody who buys, who prepares, who stores food, like if you cook extra and things like that. If you actually go into your kitchen and catalog how expensive all the pots, the pans, the bill to run your hot water heater, the fridge, the bill to run that, your freezer, the bill to run that, the microwave, it's thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stuff that you need just to be able to heat up a can of beans. So a lot of access has to do with systemic poverty that is beyond what the farmer is able to address. But to the extent that, what I can address is providing opportunities for people to reconnect with the landscape, to express themselves on the landscape as marginalized people who are systematically excluded or exploited, and then to leverage scale and integration in a good way that at least takes away one of those issues to the biggest extent we can, which is cost. But then beyond that, it goes beyond the farmer. We really do have to address systemic inequality in this country. We have to deal with the wealth gap. We have to deal with anti-democracy and all kinds of things that are putting all this pressure on people who are vulnerable in terms of food and education and housing and all of that. We have to address all that after.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll hold that thought, because those are all good things that we're going to talk about next in our next segment, Real Talk. But thank you all so much for going in on this news article, because FoodLink, it sounds like a great program. So everyone check that out. But up next, we're talking Real Talk with our guest. Welcome back, everyone. It's Climate Curious. I'm here with Diana Tellefson Torres of UFW Foundation and Chris Newman of Sylvanaqua Farms. Today, we're talking our food and our bodies. And as you just heard in the segment before, we're getting into a lot. There's so much about our food, the way that the systems are set up for how we have access to food, who has access to food, and who is distributing the food is all deeply connected. When you throw in climate change, whoa, even more. So today we're going to talk with our guests a little bit about that. Whether you're a vegan, gluten-free, pescatarian, whether you love meat, we all deserve healthy food, and that's what we're here to talk about. Okay, so Chris, I want to throw it back over to you. You are a former software engineer turned permaculture farmer. My first question is, what exactly is a permaculture farmer, and what shifted such a great leap in your career?
Yeah, I was a software engineer working for just the most evil corporations you could think of, like NSA, Lockheed Martin, et cetera, et cetera. Got over that pretty quick after having a health scare that caused me to leave that career to do something more closely tied to the land. And what motivated that was I did a lot of work with my tribe and youth in my tribe in trying to explain to them the impact that Indigenous people had on the landscapes, specifically here in the Chesapeake. I'm an enrolled member of the Chopticot Band of Piscataway Indians, and I've been deeply involved with that tribe and really trying to get our people over the trauma that's caused them to kind of internalize the noble savage myth that makes them think that we were these kind of simple people dropped into place who had no idea what we were doing here. We had corn, great. Nobody knows how it came here. Nobody knows about all the trade routes that extended from here to the tip of Chile and back. And in teaching people that, it became really important to me to express that history on the landscape itself. So my wife and I initially thought about doing like a bison ranch, but after visiting a bison farm and seeing a bison cow leap over a 6-foot tall fence from a standstill, we decided maybe we should walk before we run. So we wound up going into livestock, mostly because I'm better with animals than with plants. If something's wrong with an animal, it'll grunt or quack or squeak or something, whereas a plant just turns brown. And it's just really sad. Nobody knows why. Plants don't speak my language. So that's kind of how we got into it. And we also had kind of that homesteader permaculture kind of ethic that it's odd almost to hear myself referred to as a permaculture farmer now, because now like I've almost got knives out toward that term, because it's been so appropriative of indigenous tech and of African tech, Aboriginal tech from Australia, to the point where now I tend to just refer to myself as a term in my own language, a hakahet, which is our word for, it's a poor translation of the word farmer.
Okay.
Literally translates into a person in the earth. So it's someone who works in the earth to produce food, and that can be someone who farms, someone who does agroforestry, someone who does aquaculture, fishery, anything like that. But yeah, we started with that like little jewel box kind of, we're going to save the world from our postage stamp size like farmstead or whatever, and eventually like the engineering part of my brain like caught up with the agricultural hippie part of my brain. It was like, wait, the math doesn't work. Like, you're not feeding anybody, like you're full of crap. There's an essay I wrote about how, and I'm not going to go on too long, but there's an essay I wrote about our real watershed moment, which was when I just happened to go onto FedBizOps, which is a website the federal government puts out for all of its contracts. And I looked just to see, what do some of the food contracts look like for the federal government? Like, what are they buying? So you look at contracts for like the Department of the Army and Bureau of Prisons, and all these places that have to feed a whole bunch of people at once. And you hear about these farms like Stone Barns or Polyface and all these organizations run by these rich white people, and you think they produce a lot of food until you realize that one part of one contract from the Navy wants 200,000 pounds of beef. And then you go, oh, it would take all of us combined 10 years to produce that much for that one line item in that one contract. So
that's a lot.
that was really our journey towards, okay, the sustainable farming movement is full of crap, and we need to do something about it. So that's kind of what set us on our journey where we're at now, where we're pursuing good, bigger agriculture. Not as big as like the JBSs and Cargills and Bayers of the world, but something that can operate at a regional scale across thousands of acres and can really have that economic leverage to restore watersheds and feed people affordably and provide livings for people who want to be farmers.
Love that. Well, I'm so happy to have you here, because really, honestly, this is great, to have this conversation, with a Black and Indigenous farmer. And so there's so many more questions that I want to get to you, but I want to get some time with Diana for a little bit. Diana, I know that you've noted your mom as an early inspiration for really standing up for yourself. I wonder, what was one of those experiences you had growing up that have really shaped your values into who you are today, now being the executive director at United Farm Workers Foundation?
Yeah, well, my mom is truly an inspiration to me. She's an immigrant from Mexico, as is my stepfather. And so definitely grew up in a household where Spanish was being spoken, where I had to be an intermediary to help and read things and make sure that my parents understood the system when they had questions about anything, you name it. And so I think, early on, my mom did set up, she has a little shoe repair in San Diego County. We grew up 10 minutes from the border in San Diego County. And so my mom just always talked about some of the challenges that she had as a small business woman, woman of color, where she did have experiences with folks sometimes saying not so nice things about her, and some racism that's been involved. But she always let my sister, my brother, and I know that, you know, we can do anything that we put our minds to, that we're strong, that we need to believe in ourselves. She was very encouraging. And so I think when I started working for the farm worker movement, that was only then when I learned that my grandfather had been a bracero. So my grandfather had come to the United States to work in agriculture. During those times, this bracero program is incredibly controversial, and, you know, did not treat farm workers well who were coming in from Mexico. They were very exploited. And yet my mom did not know about this. It was my uncle who told me grandfather was a bracero, but my mom's memories were of her father not being home for months on end, and talking about not understanding why that had to be the case, and her father not talking about where he would go or his experiences. And now learning within the farm worker movement about the experiences that guest workers who come in from other countries to work in the US in the agricultural industry, and the exploitation issues that they have. And then those workers who are here also, who are undocumented. About half of farm workers are undocumented in the US. You know, just really wanting to be helpful in having farm workers have a voice. They have their own voice. As you see, you know, farm workers going to Washington, D.C. to talk directly with Congress members about the need for immigration reform, being able to have farm workers go to Sacramento here in California to talk about needed legislation in California that protects their rights, that provides them something so basic as heat standards that mean that they can have shade, just general shade, something so basic that many animals have the right to, but human beings who are working in the fields often don't. These are the types of issues that our movement and the UFW Foundation is focused on, and a lot of it is geared around immigrant workers who are here doing the very vital, quote unquote, essential work that the federal government has deemed as essential, but they are not treated as essential. And so my mom's inspiration continues now. So she's often encouraging me when there are tough issues, but she lets me know every day that the work that I do is important. And now that we both know that my grandfather was involved in agriculture, I think it's special to both of our hearts.
Yeah, for sure. There's a sense of like your journey, you know, as your own person, but really thinking about your family and your ancestors. So I love to hear that, and shout out to your mom for being that early inspiration. Okay, so we talked both of you. We've talked about this idea about farm workers and folks on doing the work not being treated fairly. I wonder, for both of you to go a little deeper, what does that look like on the everyday? How are, agribusiness, these, giant corporate farms, what's their responsibility to the workers and to the food? And how is that not being done justly? Diana, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, right now, I think something that we're advocating for both at the federal level and at different state levels is, making sure that farm workers, especially during a time of emergency pandemic, that they have hazard pay, that we're ensuring that they have sick leave. Here in California, where we've won sick leave for farm workers, many of the employers don't let the farm workers know about that, right? So a farm worker gets sick, they have COVID, they go home thinking they're not going to be paid. And their employers are not giving them the accurate information. So there's this lack, not just of information, but of accountability of the employers. And so I think, a lot of our work, we're trying to get legislation at the federal level that's passed, the Farm Laborers Protection Act, for instance, that Senator Merkley from Oregon introduced last month, that would provide paid sick leave that would allow for farm workers to limit furloughs or layoffs of farm workers, to really implement basic things like providing the appropriate masks and PPE that farm workers need. We are seeing that many farm workers are being told for them to bring their own masks. Now their resources are limited, and either you come with a mask or you're not paid and you can't work for the day. Well, that's the employer's responsibility. Whatever is needed to be able to work on that farm needs to be provided by the employer. And so that the level of lack of information that's purposefully done, and I think that just general fear. We are hearing many stories about lack of social distancing at the workplace, but because of the lack of legal status, farm workers often tell us they are fearful of bringing up this issue with their employer, and yet they're very concerned about their own health and the health of their children. And so, we're going to be distributing 900,000 masks that we just got in-kinded by an anonymous donor. So we're very excited about that in the states of California, Washington, and Oregon. But why does that have to happen? Why can't it just be accessible now that we're seeing so many farm workers that are getting COVID? It's incredibly concerning that what they need is not accessible at this given moment.
Heard you. Chris, same question for you. What is the ethic responsibility of these giant corporations?
I mean, honestly, with these giant corporations, God, I mean, hearing Diana talk, it's like listening to a Dickens novel. Like you'd think by now we wouldn't be this evil, but here we are. Just the idea that you have to bring your own mat, like, as broke as we are, like we provide masks. Like, come on. How do you fix big agriculture and their exploitative relationship toward their workers? I don't think I have anything to add that Diana hasn't said. But I'll tell you this, though. The exploitation doesn't stop just in big ag. I had a somewhat controversial Twitter thread I had out yesterday. Was that big agriculture isn't evil because it's big. It's evil because it's evil. And anybody that's worked on small farms, you talk to enough of them, you'll hear nightmare scenarios that sound every bit like a Tyson meat packing plant. This stuff is not limited to big ag. Like there's almost this exploitation ethic that runs throughout farming, and I think what it fundamentally is, and I think that that quote from Chavez that was put down below is that what is it? It said, we don't need perfect political systems, we need perfect participation. That's why our slogan is democracy in food and agriculture. It's why we're making our farm workers our employees now. We're making them owners. I'm giving up like 90% of the company so that it can be distributed among everybody. I'm not going to want to own it. It's real hard to exploit somebody that has the same motive. You just can't. If that guy's an owner and I'm an owner, it's like a law firm with a bunch of partners. It's like you might have junior partners, you might have senior partners, but at the end of the day, nobody can tell the other guy to go to hell. You gotta listen to that guy. That person's going to say, I'm not showing up if this place doesn't provide PPE. And by the way, you can't fire me because I own a piece of this. I'll see you when you get your act together. And when we get our act together, because if you're a part of it, you've got to vote in that too. So when it comes to small, quote unquote, sustainable operations that want to scale up and be part of the solution, I don't think you can do it without having direct employee ownership. I just don't see it. As long as you are accountable to some private board, or if you're accountable to stockholders who all they really care about is what their dividend yield is and what their earnings potential is, then workers are always going to fall into the bottom of that catch. Like they're going to be the last thing you think about. They're just going to be a thing on your liability sheet where it's like, all right, how can we make this liability as small as possible by paying them and protecting them as little as possible? But when you're accountable to your partners, when you're accountable to other employees, when you're accountable to the environment, if you're registered as a B Corp, where you have to be transparent about what you do, and you can't necessarily hide your BS, then things get a lot different.
I hear you.
I think
we could talk so much about this, but fortunately, this is all the time that we have today for Real Talk. Coming up next is our question and answer segment with our guests, Diana Tellefson Torres and Chris Newman. We'll be right back. Hey y'all, we're back, and we're back Climate Curious. I'm here, Shawnee Watkins. We have our guests, Diana Tellefson Torres and Chris Newman. We're talking our food and our bodies, and I'm gonna jump in. Anna B has a question about how can folks support farmers of color in this time? Chris, as a farmer of color, I'll throw the question to you first.
Give us your money. I say a lot of the people in the back. I'm not being so one of the biggest issues that farms in general have, but especially people of color who want to start and participate in farms, is that we're severely undercapitalized.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about land being the issue, and land is a big problem. Access to land, access to training and technicals and all this good stuff. But the thing is that once let's say you get those things, let's say you've gone through the hard part of getting yourself a piece of land as a lighter than the paper bag kind of shaded person, and you're able to get the training where you know what to do on that land. It's like the nightmare's just begun, because now you're going to realize you can't do it by yourself. It's a ton of work to farm. It costs money to get equipment. Things break, things die, weather happens, climate change happens. You drop the eggs, the car crashes, like all kinds of things happen, and farms are on such shoestring budgets that it's incredibly difficult not only to produce at a level that makes a difference, but it encourages corner cutting. It encourages exploitation. It encourages you to say, I'll pay my help when I can. It encourages you to say we don't necessarily need to rotate the cattle that much. They can stay on that little piece of land a little longer, and maybe it won't grow back as good, and maybe it'll compact the soil, but I don't have enough money to pay somebody to actually rotate it every day. Like when you've got a farm that's undercapitalized, it's like poverty in general. Like you don't have good options. So you start making crappy choices that are bad for you and that are bad for the people around you. So when I say give us your money, I mean that literally. Like we have a whole, the link is down there. Like we have a whole page down there where you can give money so that we can grow this thing, so we can use non-traditional means of capital, getting away from the racist ass USDA, and raise money more democratically from people who want to invest in a better system.
Yes. Well, y'all heard it first here. Donate, come up at those pockets to help. I have a question of Diana from Ina. What impact does protection of migrant and farm workers have on our food?
Oh boy, get me started on this one. I think as a country, not acknowledging the reality of farm workers till this day does impact our food system. I think, farm workers were excluded in the 1930s from many of the labor protections that many of us now enjoy, right? They don't get overtime. There's only a couple of states now, including California, New York, that provide overtime to farm workers after a certain number of hours. But most farm workers do not get overtime in this country. They were excluded from collective bargaining, so they do not have the right to unionize. And here in California, we won that right at the state level. But how ridiculous is it that this, systemic poverty is also caused by systemic racism, right? Mm-hmm. So in the 1930s, we had most farm workers who were African American in the South, and domestic workers who were also excluded. So our agricultural system is founded on quote unquote cheap labor. And so if we want stability in agriculture, and we want to make sure that farm workers, who we know are always essential, who we know are professional folks, Chris can attest to this, it is a professional job. It is not unskilled. And so if we want to maintain that stability as a country where we can grow our own food, where we can treat farm workers as the very beings who keep us alive because they put food on our tables, I think, our food system would be tremendously different. And so I think that there are many excuses we hear, but consumers, all the folks who are watching today, we have a responsibility to ensure that farm workers are protected, to ensure that they're not afraid of speaking out if there's some type of issue with the food that they are harvesting. In order for them to speak out or to do any type of whistleblowing if something's not going well at that farm, they also need to have legal status, right? And so I think that there are so many layers here that many folks don't know about, because farm workers are often so isolated in very rural areas, and are many, workers that are unseen, unlike, grocery workers who you see on a day-to-day when you go to the market, right? So I think there's so much there, and I think we really have to face that ugly history that is consistent today. And so how do we change that? We need help from folks to be active. And, Chris mentioned Cesar's quote that we need to make sure that we have perfect participation, and that includes calling Congress members to let them know that the bill that we have, the Asuncion Valdivia bill that protects farm workers from heat illness, that would provide heat standards throughout the country, gets passed, right? Having basic shade in a farm should not be a hard decision for policymakers.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Diana. You're bringing both of you, Diana and Chris, you two are both bringing such a wealth of knowledge, honestly, and it is helping a lot of us wrap our heads around where do we get our food. For like you both said, the work that you all are doing is supporting both farmers and farm workers. So please check out their links to both support the work of UFW Foundation and Sylvanaqua Farms, excuse me. Okay. Quick last question that's just like sitting on the top of my head. I be in my little Trader Joe's, my local grocery stores here in Brooklyn, and I always see, the difference between like organic and non. But, I just looking at the price for real. But can you, Kristen, as a farmer, can you tell us what does organic mean, and why does that make a difference?
It doesn't mean a damn thing.
Oh.
Organic means whatever the USDA says it can mean, and there are loopholes in USDA standards. You could drive a whole semi truck full of exploited workers through. Like it's supposed to mean that there's no chemicals, no pesticides, no it's supposed to be non-chemical agriculture. Like it's supposed to get away from synthetic fertilizers, any kind of synthetics, pesticides, fungicides, all that stuff. Your soil is supposed to be free of it. Like your soil, I think, has to test for like 3 years or something like that to not have certain traces of this and that. I don't know. Like I don't know the details of it because I've never cared, because it always just seemed like such crap. Like the stuff that you can get away with, like it's some of the rules or something, like you can't apply pesticides and fertilizers unless there's threat of a crop failure, and you can use those things and still be certified. With animals, like the BS is even worse. Like people tend to assume that if you've got like an organic steak, an organic pork chop, then it means that pig was in the woods and free range, and that cow wasn't finished in a feedlot. And that's not what it means, dude. Like with agriculture, all organic means is that the corn that they ate was organic. That's all it means. That's all it means. They could have been in pig or chicken jail for like the 6 miserable weeks they were alive or whatever, and it's still going to be just as organic as anything else. So it's not a label for consumers. It's a label for farmers who want to get a little bit more margin, and who are willing to like deal with slightly less yields and hope that it pencils out financially. But if you're looking for like what's good for you, what's good for your health, labels are not really going to help you.
That was, wow, who knew? I certainly did not know when I was asking this question. I mean, but that's so helpful to understand. And, one thing I'm hearing about, and really the whole point of Climate Curious, right, is for us just to be a little bit more aware of what we're doing, how we're acting, how we show up in this world. And so I thank you both for your spot on answers. And I hope everyone's watching, thinks about this the next time you go out grocery shopping. Okay, that's all the time that we have for our questions and answers today. Again, I just want to say thank you to our guests for great answers, as well as shout out to Now This, our media partner, and all of our viewers watching over there. Thanks so much for sending in your questions, and keep sending them in using hashtag #ClimateCurious. Up next is our quick rapid fire segment to close out the show. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back. And if you all like that music, shout out to Diana Assisi. She's a great music composer who helped produce all of our original music. Thanks so much. I've been sitting here dancing, so I just wanted to give that shout out. All right, we're back, and finally with our rapid fire segment of the show. So this is a segment where we get a little bit fun. I'm gonna ask you both a question. Diana will ask you first, and then Chris, we go by left to right on the screen. And quick 1 to 2 word answer, whatever comes to your mind. You got it? You ready?
I think
It'll be great. Okay, first question. One person, dead or alive, to spend 1 hour with. Diana, you first.
Oh, that's too easy. I would love to meet Caesar Chavez.
That seems right. Chris, how about you?
Diana Witta. And that might be a name a lot of people aren't familiar with, but that is basically the writer of the Haudenosaunee Great Law of Peace, and the organizer of the Six Nations, basically.
Awesome. I'm going to do some Googling after this, so I know more. Thank you. Okay, favorite vegetable, Diana?
Zucchini.
Say that?
Zucchini.
Ooh, okay, yes. Chris?
Ooh, nothing beats a fresh strawberry. It's not a
That's not, it's produce. It's fresh.
Kidding.
Okay, next one, tea or coffee?
Tea.
Oh, coffee. I eat raw coffee beans. I just skip the liquid.
I'm just now picturing you, Chris, out on the farm. You know, you get just like picking up a ground of beans, just going.
Like 2 days ago on my Instagram stories, I put my favorite snack. You take the coffee bean and you dip it in butter and you dip it in sugar and you eat it, and you feel amazing. Yeah,
butter and sugar and coffee. Ooh, that sounds my heart.
I've never heard it before.
It's coffee.
You've heard it, Diana?
But it sounds quite interesting.
Everybody's got to try it. You'll be so awake for so long.
When we come down to Sylvanaqua Farms, I'm going to ask for it as a trial, please. Okay, and final question. Who is the last person you texted?
Last person I texted, shoot. I would say my husband.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that I left my juice at home and I told him to put it in the fridge,
Mm-hmm.
but it was in my truck.
Love that. Well, shout out to your husband anyway, because it sounds like he would have come through and helped you no matter what.
Exactly.
And Chris?
The last person I texted was Sarah Mock, who is kind of sort of like our chief operating officer type and is helping us to put on our big boy pants while the farm grows up.
Shout out. Well, shout out to Sarah. Hey. All right, y'all. Well, that's all the time that we have for today's episode of Climate Curious. I want to thank our fabulous guests. This conversation's been so thrilling. Diana Tellefson Torres of the United Farm Workers Foundation and Chris Newman of Sylvanaqua Farms. Can you both share where can folks follow you, support you? How can they engage more with your work?
Yeah, they can follow us at UFWF or Facebook. We're at UFWFoundation.org for our website. Would love any donations right now to support our COVID-19 rapid response work. Those are the things that are in my memory right now.
Great. And Chris?
Best place to follow us is on Instagram at Sylvanaqua Farms. We are quite filtered, very direct about absolutely everything. I think you'll have a good time. And you can also donate at sylvanaqua.com/invest.
All right, y'all. Well, click those links, share and follow, do all the things to support these fabulous movement leaders. Just amazing. All right, I'm Shanae Watkins of Agency of Joy, and next week we're going to be talking about our soulful nature and the earth with some very special guests, so you don't want to miss next week. Thanks again to our partners at Now This for streaming and to the Solutions Project for presenting this fabulous web series. We'll see you next week. Don't forget to smile, everyone. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
We come with exploitation and extraction.